Hi, I'm Max Rudin, President and Publisher of Library of America, and welcome to LOA Live. Library of America is a nonprofit organization dedicated to publishing authoritative new volumes of great American writers and to keeping the multivocal, democratic spirit of our literary tradition a vital part of the culture. A special welcome to Library of America fellows and members who support our nonprofit mission. The 1960s transformed American crime fiction, along with much else. Tonight, we explore some astonishingly inventive novels that pulsed with the energies of that turbulent decade. A new two-volume set, Crime Novels of the 1960s, 9 classic thrillers, just published in Library of America, was selected and edited by Geoffrey O'Brien, who joins us tonight. A link to the book will be dropped in the chat. Special thanks to our promotional partners for this program, the Association of Literary Scholars, Critics, and Writers, the Crime Novels Association, and the Film Noir Foundation. In the 1960s, gifted writers, some at the peak of their careers, others just starting out, took advantage of the cultural openings of the times to reimagine American crime fiction with audacious new subjects, forms, and themes. Geoffrey O'Brien has chosen 9 of the best, from The Score, a taut, smash and grab heist novel by Richard Stark, to Patricia Highsmith's eerie meta-thriller, The Tremor of Forgery, to Chester Himes's Run Man Run, a nightmarish tale of racism, police violence, and a desperate young man on the run. That's one of 5 novels restored to print in this new Library of America edition. Joining LOA Live to discuss these books is a killer lineup. Sarah Weinman is a widely published journalist and author who writes the monthly crime and mystery column for the New York Times Book Review. Her books include Scoundrel, named a Best Book of 2022 by Time, Esquire, CBC, and NPR, and The Real Lolita, named a Best Book of 2018 by NPR, BuzzFeed, LitHub, and the San Francisco Chronicle, and winner of the Crime Writers of Canada Award in Nonfiction. For the Library of America series, she edited Women Crime Writers, 8 suspense novels of the 1940s and 50s. She joins us from her home in Manhattan. Gene Seymour was film critic and jazz reviewer for New York Newsday for 18 years. He has contributed articles on politics, culture, science fiction, and sports to the New Republic, The Baffler, The Nation, Book Forum, CNN.com, and the LA Times, among many others. He joins us from Philadelphia. Geoffrey O'Brien, editor of this new set, is a poet, critic, and author of books on crime fiction, film, music, and cultural history, including Hard-Boiled America, and most recently, Arabian Nights of 1934. He was for many years our colleague, editor-in-chief of Library of America. He joins us from his home in Brooklyn. David Lehman, this evening's moderator, is a poet, writer, and literary critic, and founder and series editor for the Best American Poetry. He has published 14 volumes of poetry and prose poetry, most recently The Morning Line and 100 Autobiographies, a memoir. A Fine Romance, his book on American Jewish songwriters, won ASCAP's Deems Taylor Award, and he's also written about murder mysteries, the New York School of Poets, Frank Sinatra, and the spirit of Noir. He joins us from his home in Ithaca, New York. We invite your questions and comments. The Q&A button is on your menu bar. Please let us know where you're viewing from. And now, please welcome our panel and our moderator, David Lehman.
Thank you, Max, and welcome everyone. It's very nice to be here with Gene, Sarah, and Geoffrey. Kudos to you, Geoffrey, for the 2-volume set. You made my November a spectacular one because I got to read 9 novels and reread only 2 or 3 of them. So you opened my eyes, and you always do. I wanted to ask you about, you chose Doll by Ed McBain, one of my favorite my favorite police procedural author. And then as I started reading the Frederick Brown novel that you chose for the set, The Murderers, there's a dollhouse bar, and there's a girl who's described as a doll, and I wondered whether that repetition occurred to you, strategically as you were editing.
No, that is coincidence, but no, it's curious. The doll motif surfaces a lot. I think we went back and forth about the doll in Don Siegel's film The Lineup, which also figures prominently. No, I was for me this was also about discovery, and many of these books I had not encountered before embarking on this project, and of course some were old favorites that I was very happy to get back to. But no, it's interesting that you know we've already in the Library of America done a series of volumes covering 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And I do see this as very much a continuation of that project. And four of these writers have already appeared in the Library of America in Sarah's Women Crime Writers set and in the earlier crime novel set. And to talk about decades in a way, it's there is a continuum, and many of these writers have roots in other eras. Himes and Frederick Brown began their careers in the 30s. Margaret Millar, Dorothy B. Hughes from the beginning of the 40s on. Evan Hunter, aka Ed McBain, was active throughout the 50s, as was Highsmith, as was Charles Williams. So really, the only two newcomers here are Donald Westlake as Richard Stark and Dan Marlowe, but they all participate in a wider culture. And I think at this point, they're I mean, crime fiction has reached a moment in the 60s where it's no longer this kind of crime novel is no longer as dominant as it was in the 40s and 50s because other things are coming in. Spy novels are coming in. Fantasy novels are enjoying a sudden surge, and science fiction for sure. So there's a kind of casting about for different ways to go at it. And I think if I had to pick one word to connect these very different books and very different writers, it would be that buzzword that was very much part of the 60s literary culture, alienation, which was applied to everything from Kafka to Beckett to Antonioni. It's all of these books participate in that, and certainly Millar's The Fiend and Highsmith's Tremor of Forgery, very, very notably. But and Frederick Brown, at the end of his career, he had written countless stories and novels, and The Murderers is almost his last novel. Uh, and he's writing about a kind of quasi beat scene of people hanging around Hollywood looking for a job. Uh, but he gives it this sense of, I mean, the very opening sentence of the book is, "I woke to darkness with the shreds of a ridiculous dream, keeping me from knowing what had awakened me or even who I was." And that notion of the narrator who is in very doubtful connection with his own identity crops up again in Highsmith, and The Fiend is just full of people who don't don't exactly know who they are.
As I think you point out in your introduction, Frederick Brown manages almost a comic kind of atmosphere, which is unusual with noir. And I likened the progress of his plot here and in other books to the irrefutable logic of a drunkard, where everything makes perfect sense if you have one drink after another. Alienation in the 60s, it was said that the Partisan Review in the pre-computer era had a typewriter key. You hit the key and out came Alienation, which I think is a good term, as is noir for these books. You were shaking your head, Gene, in assent, I think, on that point.
Yeah, no. First of all, I want to say that I'm very, very honored to be in this crowd, and also just add as an aside that when I came across these two volumes, some of you will understand when I say that it evoked a memory of my going into any drugstore in the 1960s. And just the smell of a drugstore and the smell of fresh paperbacks all stacked on racks. And just my eyes just popping out of my head, looking at all these books and thinking, where am I going to go next? And to jump back to Jeff's point, where one usually went back, surprisingly enough, was inside your own skin. And all of these books, and I want to talk specifically about both the Dorothy Hughes book and the Chester Himes book, are very explicitly going into the very special kind of alienation of race. That was a subject that wasn't as prevalent in the 40s and the 50s in popular culture, but became more so with the advent of the civil rights movement and its aftermath. And I found books like that spoke to me in that era and spoke to the very kind of special, I won't say special, the kind of alienation that one felt being in new surroundings and surroundings that were beyond what you were used to, and how that felt. I was looking to literature in those days for guides to get out of that. And what was so wonderful about having somebody like Chester Himes around in your life was that you could read somebody like that. And I wasn't aware of his background, but when I found out that he was an ex-convict, that he had this very, very hard life, that led him to be nothing but a writer. He's often said in interviews that he decided to be a writer because he had no choice. He had to do it. And there was nothing else that he could do except write the books that he wrote, and say the things that he said. I found that tremendously empowering. I found it tremendously invigorating, and the sensation of being in touch with these books again, with those two books, but with all of them really, was part of that kind of it's ironic because, to feel a kind of fellowship with books that talk about alienation seems like a non sequitur, but that's how I felt, and it was great to have that connection again.
Well, it's certainly true that the Dorothy Hughes and Chester Himes books are notable in discussing racism. And in one case, the writer is Black, and in the other case, not. Women in many of these novels are, as they used to be, objects of lusty desire, but there are 3 women novelists in the set, and Margaret Millar was, for me, a real eye-opener. Sarah, you read all of her books, I believe.
suspect there's a handful I haven't read, but yeah, I think I've read the bulk of her canon. And I remember when I first heard about this set, and I think it was at the beginning of this year, and I thought, finally, we're getting a 1960s set, because I think that, you know, as is the Library of America's wont, it takes a very long time for projects to gestate, and certainly going back to earlier noir collections. I mean, the first one came out in 1997, and then mine was 2015, and this is now we're almost at 2024. And it's, you know, it'll probably be a few years before we start thinking of the 70s. But certainly when I was on the road promoting women crime writers, I would get a lot of questions asking me if I would ever do a 1960s set. And I had to say that it didn't seem like a prospect, because the major women writers of the 60s were Dorothy B. Hughes and Margaret Millar and Patricia Highsmith, and though she's not included in this set, Charlotte Armstrong, who I think wrote some of her strongest books in the decade, especially Lemon in the Basket, which is, to my mind, one of the few hybrids of domestic suspense and conspiracy thriller. But the point being is that the continuity that Geoffrey was talking about is why there's so much strength in this collection, but also speaks to sort of the weirdness and the upheaval of the genre as a whole. I mean, you have spy thrillers, which are not represented here, in part because most of the American writers who were in that writing in that format wouldn't emerge until the 70s. I'm thinking of Charles McCary and Robert Littell. Mostly it was a British enterprise at this point. And with the police procedural, it was still coming into its own. A lot of it was British, but then, of course, it makes sense that Ed McBain is in here. And I think Dahl is a really great exemplar of the 87th Precinct series, because you really get the sense that it's a workplace drama of how the cops are interacting with each other, but also just how weird the book is, and how like absolutely nuts all the characters are, even to some degree. The main quote, I mean, because it's a workplace drama, it's an ensemble cast, but there is the sense that Steve Carell is kind of the main guy. And even he's kind of a little askew and off kilter. And there was one quote about the Frederick Brown that I wanted to highlight that Geoffrey had written in his introduction. So if you'll bear with me, I will. It was this idea that Brown was bidding farewell to a world he increasingly found alien. And I know that we talked about alienation a little bit earlier on, but just this idea that Brown was so alienated from the culture, and that a lot of these veteran writers who had been publishing books for decades were suddenly faced with just major social change and major sense of the world is not working the way it ought to have, but also we have to kind of figure out how to make it work for us. And so I kind of wanted, you know, I hope that we'll get to talk a little bit more about what that alienation and upheaval didn't just mean for writing in the culture, but how it affected the writers themselves.
You brought up Dahl of Ed McBain. I agree, it's wonderful. And one characteristic of some of his books is that the one-word title has multiple meanings. And in this case, Steve Carell, who is the general stand-in for the author in the 87th Precinct, is subjected to a kind of torture. I don't think he has to suffer like that in any of the other books. It's usually Bert Kling who goes through some misery. And one great thing about McBain is he loves his characters. And at one point, it turns out that the carrying of a doll, Frank O'Hara, Geoffrey wrote that dolls mean death in Memorial Day 1950. The policeman has noticed that Steve Carell has been carrying a doll, and that's a significant fact. And the patrolman thinks, how could this be of importance? And when told that it is, he says, my wife is always right. And I thought it was such a beautiful moment that he caught in this subordinate character. Another moment in that book, he says it started to rain courtesy of the vernal equinox, which
yeah. Well, McBain, there's always a lot of weather in the books. That's I think, I mean, to me, his books really have this fantastic collage quality because he mixes so many different modes, so many different kinds of language. He'll have these kind of lyrical passages about the rain in Central Park, or not Central Park because he renames everything, but and then this incredible dialogue, some page after page of incredibly terse dialogue, violent scenes that are horrific, and then lots of comedy, weirdly juxtaposed with that. Um, and then on top of that, the actual documents that he inserts, like the modeling brochure and the handwritten letter and all of this kind of thing. So it's a kind of modernist effect, really. I mean, he created his own texture, and carried it on for what, like 54 volumes, I think, in this series.
Yeah, I had forgotten what a mixed media guy he was in putting together these books. I mean, that he used a lot of different graphic content, which a lot of these, which a lot of publishers didn't really get into. But it's almost as if McBain, Evan Hunter, who had of course been a screenwriter along with everything else, was aware of how you can enhance his content with things like the layout, the resume of the model. I don't know who that girl was who they got, but I don't know how this job was presented to her. But wow, I mean, and it's not like he's curtailing imagination. He's expanding it by getting into these very recognizable graphic items.
Although speaking of graphic, I was kind of surprised at how graphic the opening was with, the little girl, she's clutching the doll and the model is brutally murdered. And I don't know, I guess I wasn't expecting it to hit so viscerally as it did, but I also think that it kind of had to.
Had to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, McBain did not hold back on violence, and I think his books, I mean, starting in the 50s when the series began, were notable for the harshness, but the idea was to convey this is the big city. This is the level of violence that is normal in the city.
Sarah's point is a very good one. On the second page of the novel, the sentence occurs: obscenities and Blade, like partners in an evil copulation, move together in perfect rhythm and pitch, enveloping the model in alternating splashes of blood and spittle. That is very unusually graphic, I think, for McBain, who is really shocked by such. But it raises the question of obscenity, the relation of obscenity and Blade, and the question of evil. Some of the characters in these books would substantiate the thesis that evil is a real thing, that the criminals are not criminals merely because they've come from deprived backgrounds or have not been nourished properly, but certainly in Dead Calm and the policeman in the Chester Himes book.
I mean, that guy's an out and out psychopath.
Yes, but I was surprised with I was frankly very surprised by the relative sympathy Himes showed the detective, even with all of his neuroses and pathologies exposed like that. I mean, there are a couple of moments, particularly after he's kind of woken up to what he's done, where he allows you to feel not exactly sorry for him, but to feel that kind of empathy. And I think that would surprise a lot of people who only know Chester Himes as this kind of this chronicler of remorseless violence perpetuated, in Harlem, specifically in the Coffin Head and Gravedigger novels. But that was a surprise to me. I was really surprised at how much he allowed himself and allows the reader to feel a little bit of empathy with somebody who you'd otherwise want to just run away from as fast as you possibly could.
He's a monster who kind of takes on a life of his own, and I mean, what's interesting is that the whole book is an extrapolation of an incident that happened to Himes when he was briefly in. He spent like 11 months in New York in 1955, although he was already living in Europe. And just as he was about to go back to Europe, he had a run-in with a drunken cop waving his gun around, making accusations, just as in the very beginning of the novel. And that incident was diffused, and he simply extrapolates what could have happened into the book. But yeah, I agree. I mean, that weird sympathy comes through, which I can't help thinking it's a writerly thing, and he's into the character.
Yeah.
Or he's trying to show that racism is a product of madness. And so as a result, if you're that off your head and that mad, that maybe engendering even some degree of empathy is kind of incumbent. But I can't read Chester Hines's mind, especially all these years posthumously.
I felt that the Patricia Highsmith novel was the spookiest of the 9, and that doesn't surprise me because she frightens me. Her writing actually frightens me. There's a lift of the strangers on a train motif in one of these novels. I think maybe in the Frederick Brown.
The Frederick Brown uses the same device of the switch murders.
But he also calls he seems to have some James M. Cain homage in there too. That's like refracted in a cracked mirror kind of sense.
Yeah. I also found that, and this is a writer that I didn't know anything about. This was the one real discovery for me, was Dan Marlowe.
I hoped we were going to talk about Dan Marlowe. That book,
yeah,
is
because
amazing.
I had no knowledge. In fact, I thought it was a pseudonym at first because, hey, I'm a crime writer. I'll just use Philip Marlowe's last name, but no, that's his real name. And I didn't know what to expect. And the thing that people don't understand about some of these books, I mean there's a tendency to regard these books as being throwaway trash or whatever, but all of these writers were sometimes capable, and we have 2 poets on the panel, so I figured that they would know this, of a kind of almost a throwaway poetry that just kind of jumps up and surprises you. Like and this is something that for some reason didn't occur to anybody but me, but there's a short line in the Marlowe where he talks about the German Shepherd that he adopts, and the dog jumps in the front seat, and I think I don't have the line written down, I'm sorry to say, but he talks about how the dog sat in the front like a college professor. And I thought, really? And I thought, well, okay, and it just seemed to come out of nowhere. But as you're reading these things, whether you're taking your time with them or whether you're trying to get to the end, these lines, these passages, these metaphors and everything else, I mean, that's been there. That's part of the American crime tradition. But particularly when you're coming across a writer that you never heard of, when something like that hits you, you go, wow, and you feel a sense of wonder about, where did that come from? Where did that specific image come from?
It's awful.
Marlowe was a very strange character. I mean, his own life is a novel in itself.
Have any of you read Charles Kelly's biography of Marlowe? It's called Gunshots in Another Room, and it really chronicles just the wild and wacky and weird life.
Yeah, didn't know there was one. I didn't know there was one.
Yeah, I would. It's great. I would highly recommend getting it, if only just for the Alan Nussbaum sections. And just to be super brief on this, after The Name of the Game is Death came out, Marlowe started getting like weird phone calls and letters, and it turned out that it was this guy on the run, and he was a bank robber, and he killed this guy, and he had read The Name of the Game is Death and really liked it and just reached out to Marlowe, and eventually he gets caught, serves time, they become friends. Nussbaum also befriends lots of other writers, including Donald Westlake.
Yeah.
And he does this amazing Q&A that's included in the Westlake Miscellany that Levi Stahl edited some years ago. And Nussbaum becomes this character of his own and is active in the mystery world, but is still friends with Marlowe until a major health issue kind of destroyed his career. So that's the potted version of that.
Yeah, they
Great
were
tip.
roommates at one
Great
point.
tip.
Yeah.
They were, yes.
That's a great
What-
tip.
Marlowe's
And then he got amnesia. I mean, the whole life is
Yeah.
And the thing is, he never wrote anything quite as good as the name of the Game is Death.
absolutely no. Name of the Game is Death. To me, has this quality of some. It's like he's taking dictation from some other
It has that feel.
personality.
Yeah, it's like
That's that
real
feel.
outsider art.
It has that feel, and it's like it's his own. But that's the thing about guys like him, about writers like him, men and women. It's like they're listening to it's like they've locked on to this other alternate universe, and they're just taking signals from that, you know. And I mean, I think Margaret Millar is like that. I think certainly Himes, and to some extent Donald Westlake, who fascinates me for many other reasons, not so much what's in his life that he's telling us or implying, but what he's not telling us. When I read his books, I think, okay, he knows too much about this world not to have taken part in it himself. He must have done a little, a little thievery or burglary,
Well,
free time.
I met Westlake at one point, and he was telling me stories about when he was in the Air Force, and all these little scams that he would do just to on a very small scale, but the pleasure he took in this. And I thought, oh yeah, this is Parker, the
Exactly,
planning
Parker.
these.
Or all the other people that he had in those books, like the actor
Grofield.
Yeah.
Garfield, and
Yeah. Well, Grofield, I think, is Westlake. Yeah.
yes,
No,
yes, I think so.
No,
I
Grofield
think
is
so.
a combination of Westlake and his first wife, because Nidra, his first wife, did do summer stock, and I think he kind of borrowed a lot of her life in making Grofield, even as I think he kind of incorporated himself too. No, I mean, he was all his characters.
Yeah.
Westlake also, of course, was a tremendous comic novelist.
Yes, he was.
There's one called Adios Scheherazade, which is a spoof of pornography book,
Yeah.
and there's one called Dancing.
A spoof of Alan Marshall, Sheldon Lord. Those were Marshall was definitely a pseudonym he used when he was writing porn. Lord was Lawrence Blocks for the most part. I mean, and then they wrote some together, and that was how they bonded when they were young men.
Yeah.
He was a great caper writer also, as is Lionel White, who I just saw a movie version of one of the books I just read. And I think he's an underrated.
Yeah. Well, Pierrot le Fou is a Lionel White novel originally.
Yep. It just amuses again, but these guys weren't just. I mean, to use the reductive term hack or anything like that. I mean, I get it. I understand that's how people saw them, and maybe partly how they saw themselves. But some of the stuff they come up with, some of the scene setting and everything else, however formulaic it seems, they're much more than that to get the kind of, even a simple simile or a simple or the descriptions you talked about, Jeff, in McBain's books of weather, of violence and everything else. I mean, it's not. Yes, they're trying to keep the readers there. They know their audience, and they're carrying. but they're doing all this stuff as, I won't say poets exactly, but there's poetry in what they do, I think. Real
And
poetry.
they're also, I mean, on the level of construction, I mean, a book like The Fiend or any of the Parker novels, McBain constantly inventing new devices because he has to top himself, after
Yep.
50 odd novels, he has to somehow keep finding new tricks and just new angles to approach something from. I mean, Westlake in the Parker novels, David Bordwell has written a very nice chapter on Westlake where he gets into the structure of the Parker novels, and it really is it's almost like the higher mathematics, the way things are laid out.
Well,
Yeah.
I thought of a lot of the Parker novels as following AABA structure because it's like the first two sections are often Parker, and then it jumps to other people, and that's the B section. Then it comes back to Parker. And I don't think all the novels followed it, but quite a lot of them do. And we know Westlake was a structure nerd because he talked about this, and he mentioned that there was one Grofield novel, I think it was Lemons Never Lie, the last one, where he was proud of it because he felt he invented a structure where it was kind of a bounce. The ball would drop, then would rise, drop, rise, drop, rise some more. And he said he hadn't seen that in any other novel before. And this was somebody who compared Hammett to Nabokov structurally, which I only learned recently, and it kind of blew my mind. So he was somebody who was, I think of as an architect in prose. And that's, I think, why his work is going to endure. I mean, I just recently revisited some of his later books, The Hook and The Axe. And my God, those books they still hold up, and they're still amazing.
I wonder how many he wrote in an average year, because his output is enormous.
Yeah.
Under the pseudonyms and under his own name.
Yeah. For a while, I was back to reading the Parkers in succession, and they were a bunch of friends of mine. And I don't know if the people who come across this anthology may not know this, but there are variations of the first line of those Parker books, like when the blank, blank, blank Parker, and that's how I would set things off, and so we came up with our own variations of that. When the plumber walked into the door, Parker at some kind of non sequitur, we would try to top each other, trying to come up with a more absurd, dependent clause to that. But I think when I look back, as you say, Sarah, he had a sense of structure, a sense of timing. I think of it as a composition of sorts, where you go back to the theme that you started with, and the way you turn that switch on is by saying, when the cops burst through the door, Parker leapt out of the window, and we're off. I think that those kinds of things are worth it in every book you read, no matter where it's placed or in the literary canon or how. I was not aware that Westlake had made that comparison of Hammett and Nabokov, but why not? Really?
Yeah, exactly. Why not?
Why not?
I mean, my other favorite story with that regard is someone asked Westlake what the difference between Parker and Dortmunder, who is the main series character of his comic crime series, and he said Parker can always get a parking spot, Dortmunder never can.
Yep. That's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. And of course, that's the kind of thing he would come up with,
Absolutely.
That's the kind of thing he would come up with. Yeah.
The Millar book is unusual, I think, also because the murder is not presented as a murder. It's very much a subordinate event that you can get past without noticing that a crime has been committed. What did you make of that?
Who are you
Well,
directing
sorry,
the
we're
question
talking-
to?
To all of us, yeah.
Okay.
Sarah.
Well, the thing that I keep coming back to with The Fiend, and I know I've said this on multiple occasions, is that it is the only book I can think of where it has a pedophile character and he's possibly the most sympathetic character in the book, and that includes the children. And I think there's just a level of like scalpel precision that Millar had in terms of, you know, the nastiness and the backbiting that happens in a suburban space, that it almost like infects everybody in its orbit. And she did that in some of the short stories that she wrote too, like the People Across the Canyon, but certainly was evident in many of her other novels. But there's something about The Fiend where it's presented as, here's this guy coming back to town, he has this terrible secret. We learn pretty quickly what it is, but there's just so much else going on of these people are having affairs with one another, these people are neglecting children, these children are acting out certain parables, and everybody is complicit somehow. And as a result, it's just really quite unlike anything that I've read, and yet it's so in keeping with Millar's own body of work, because she was merciless that way. She just, you know, saw what was actually going on and did not have any trace of sentimentality, unlike her husband, who was, you know, in many ways all sentimentality.
No, I was about to say the different. She is much more cold-blooded than
Yes.
than
So,
Ken,
Ross McDonald.
aka Ross McDonald. Yeah.
Sorry to talk over.
All right.
I was going to rejoin that Ross McDonald's books are variations on the Oedipal cycle, or the Oedipal complex, and it's a very interesting deep course in psychotherapy, and also very studied mastery of the complicated hard-boiled simile that you'll find in Chandler. But Millar is completely different, and as you say, Sarah, beneath this ordinary suburban genteel veneer lurks this evil. One interesting thing is that you replied to my question with The Fiend. My question was really about Highsmith.
I was wondering, yeah.
But maybe
the typewriter, yeah.
Maybe it applies to both, that that the murder is an incidental. It's not at the forefront, and nor is it the climactic moment at the end of Frederick Brown's book, or the opening corpse and McBain's book. The Highsmith is very weird, I think.
I mean, isn't that kind of a hallmark of a lot of Highsmith novels? I often would find, as I would read them, that I'd have to almost go back and check, wait, did she just kill that guy? There's something about, there's just an abruptness in how she relays this information that it really is almost blink and you miss it. And I wonder if it was trying to approximate just the shock and the abruptness of what violence would be like in real life, that's the only way to approximate it in fiction.
I'm not sure.
I love the fact the book ends with Howard Ingham walking off with his typewriter, which is now repaired. So you could say it's a novel about a guy whose typewriter gets damaged, he gets it fixed, and then he goes home.
And it's very misanthropic. She's very misanthropic.
Yeah.
And yet endlessly fascinating. I think I'm going to be fascinated by Highsmith for the rest of my life.
She's scary. I find that I'm reading the book and feeling that much more suspicious of the British fellow than of the guy who threw his typewriter. What a weird instrument of death.
It's not William Burroughs.
It could also be a self-portrait, you know, of sorts.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, if you read her journal from the writing of it, a lot of the same thoughts are found.
I can't remember, was Tremor one of the ones she had difficulty with? Because I know that with The Two Faces of January, that was the one that really vexed her from the beginning of the 60s.
I have not read that.
I don't think it's quite as good.
Yeah, I have not read that.
Well, she was very pleased, apparently, that Tremor of Forgery was being treated as a literary novel. That this was.
Yeah, I
what
didn't
she
know that
going for.
it was taken so seriously when it came out. This was 68, right? 1968?
Yeah, well, Graham Greene loved it, so
Yeah.
that
Oh,
helped.
okay.
I think there was a Highsmith revival in the 1980s.
Right.
And when she was discovered or rediscovered. And I remember writing for Newsweek at the time, and it was nice to see her getting this attention. That was the decade of Elmore Leonard and P.D. James and Ruth Rendell getting cover treatment.
Yeah.
This is just an aside, but you mentioned, Sarah, you mentioned earlier about spy fiction of the 60s. There's one name from that decade and beyond who I often thought sort of had his feet in kind of both in the novel of intrigue, in the same way that Graham Greene did, and that's Ross Thomas.
Oh, I love Ross Thomas.
He had his feet in both those and everything else, and he was.
And I'm curious what Geoffrey thinks about this. Is that, to me, even though he started his career in the 60s and the Cold War swap is great, I don't think he really hit his stride until the 70s and the 80s. I mean,
I agree.
With Chinaman's Chance and Out on the Rim and The Fools in Town Are on Our Side. I mean, there's so many great Thomas books ahead that starting off with an early one seems like it would really do a disservice to him.
Yeah, actually, I went back to Cold War Swap, and it didn't quite live up to my memory of it. But
yeah,
but
I actually feel like some of the later McCorkle and Padillo books hold up better.
Yes.
Like when he came back to the series in I think the 90s.
Well, the later books like Briar Patch,
yes,
and all those. I mean, he's definitely a subject for future research in this vein. He really is.
He remains underrated.
Yep.
Every time there's been a revival of Ross Thomas, it just never quite holds. And I just think it's because he's perpetually ahead of the times. Like I went back to Missionary Stew in 2016 and I thought, oh my God, this is absolutely foreshadowing this election. And I suspect I'm going to go back to it next year too, because there's just something about the way Thomas looked at the world, but particularly America, that again was no sentimentality, but also just really got underneath and exposed the banality of how people operated, especially in politics.
Well, when I read Thomas, I think of that Earl Stanley Gardner fan, Evelyn Waugh, and I always think that Ross Thomas is what Evelyn Waugh would have written like if he'd been a Southwestern Democratic Party member and saw the world through that prism, all of it, and just said what was honest in the same deadpan, shoot from the hip, wit that Waugh had,
Well, Graham Greene was mentioned a couple of times, and I have to say that he's my favorite, and I think Brighton Rock might be my favorite of all of his books, but there's a little detour for us, I suppose. But one thing he does do is talk about evil, and in Brighton Rock, there's a difference between right and wrong and good and evil, and he gets the reader to believe that premarital sex may be a worse sin than murder. Now, this is a big ask to make of a reader. It's very unusual, but he has a very strong sense of evil as something real, like the character in Dead Calm, who is, there's no motivation strong enough for the evil that he does. It's, it's not money, there's not one of the usual things. And I read these books and I have a lively conversation with myself about the nature of evil and its relation to noir and why we love noir. And since there are only 5 minutes left in our discussion, I wanted to ask you, why do you suppose so many of us who are intellectuals, poets, jazz lovers, are so attracted to these books that they've lasted really well. They really speak to us.
I really think the form is really important. I mean, as with jazz, I mean, it's a similar. I mean, Gene, you mentioned music before, and I do think of this form as a musical form, not just noir, but I mean, crime fiction in general. But noir, of course, has its particular atmospheric elements working in that structure.
Yeah, and it is, yeah, Jeff, and it is the music, I think, that you're talking about, and not just the thematic structure and the way it sort of hangs together and pulls you, but the tone, the color. I hate to say mood because it seems so obvious, but all those things combine into a context that allows you to consider the things that David was talking about. You know, well, what is evil? Well, evil is evil to everybody except the person doing it, it seems, you know, and that is where the fascination comes from, you know. Maybe the people who write these books and tell these stories are seeing something in us through these characters that you know, can only be
as somebody who writes true crime, who reviews crime fiction, who has published shorter crime fiction and eventually will publish longer crime fiction, what attracts me is that this is the window into human behavior, into how society ought to work, but most often does not. But also, to go back to the music motif, it's these authors either had rhythm or they didn't, and we're attracted to the ones who really had rhythm.
Yep, absolutely.
And when you see movies made of some of these books, the incidental music in the background is and plays an interesting factor. Is an interesting factor.
Yep.
What the piano player is playing and how it fits in counterpoint to the action. And Sarah, I'm looking forward to reading your anthology of the women writers of the 40s. I read Helen
and 50s. Yes.
Recently, The Horizontal Man.
Oh yes, I believe that was also one that Geoffrey really liked too. I think we discussed this a lot when we were putting this collection together.
The one problem
is
that after you've seen Psycho, the conclusion of Helen Eustace's book is not quite as powerful, don't you think?
Well, but you can't really blame Helen Eustace for that. She didn't know that Robert Bloch was going to come along. But for 1946 in the time, it was pretty radical.
Oh yes, and furthermore, anyone who lifts a poem from Auden to title the book automatically gets a pass for not anticipating an Alfred Hitchcock movie that was made 14 years later. So they're all acquitted, those earlier writers. Final comment.
Just it's a great collection with a lot of great novels, and everybody should read it.
It is great. Geoffrey, you did an amazing job, and I don't know how much reading you did to end with these 9. How many McBain? Like, why did you choose this and not Axe from the same period?
Well, choosing a McBain was hard. There were so many good ones. And Highsmith also. I mean, there were obviously other Highsmith novels. Tremor of Forgery I wanted because it pushes the limit and it really almost gets to a point where I think at least one person has already complained that this is not a crime novel. So why is it in the book? But it's if it feels like a crime novel, and
Yep.
you know, it must be one.
It's the duck world version. If it walks
Yeah.
like a duck, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, yeah, of course it's a crime novel. But then there are a lot of things that we don't think of as crime novels that are crime novels too. And I don't want to go into that litany again, because that's a whole that'll get us really into the rabbit hole. But it's always good to have these books, as I mentioned at the start, to remind me, first of all, of the pleasure it is to come up to a drugstore rack where these things are waiting for you. You just have to just take about 10 of them, which is what I did once
Yeah.
a long time ago, and simply dive into something where the language has music and gives you access to a kind of feeling that's unfamiliar to you, that you're not sure you want to stay there for very long, but you're there, and you come away not so much learning something, but becoming accustomed to another area of feeling that you may not have gotten there earlier. And I think that anybody who comes across these books are going to have the same simple pleasure of doing all that, you know.
And one other thing is that the books all have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yep.
And that Aristotelian dictum is very strong for a writer. It'd be very foolish to drop a plot, just as you're taking a big risk if you don't have melody in your song. And these books all have a driving rhythm. It's very hard to put one of them down,
Right.
as you start it.
Yep. When you're there, you're there.
So I'd like to thank everyone on the panel. 657 was given to us as a time of some importance. Why? I'm not certain, but I think it means that we are to salute Geoffrey on this great accomplishment, and thank Gene and Sarah, both of whom I've met for the first time this evening, and I hope for many more pleasurable occasions to come.
You've been listening to David Lehman, Geoffrey O'Brien, Gene Seymour, and Sarah Weinman discuss 1960s crime thrillers. The new 2-volume collection, Crime Novels of the 1960s, 9 Classic Thrillers, edited by Geoffrey O'Brien, is just published in Library of America, volumes number 370 and 371 in the series. This concludes the 2023 season of LOA Live. If you've enjoyed these free programs, please consider supporting them with a donation during this season of giving. The link to donate is at loa.org/LOA Live. I hope you'll join us for forthcoming online events from Library of America. On January 17th, it's Why Don DeLillo Deserves the Nobel, a conversation with Mark Osteen, editor of the LOA DeLillo edition, and Jerry Howard, DeLillo's editor on his masterpiece, Libra. Details about this and other upcoming LOA Live events can be found on our website, loa.org, where you'll also find information about the crime novels and Don DeLillo's volumes, and links to purchase those and other editions of Great American Writing. You'll also find recordings of tonight's and previous LOA Live events. Thanks so much again to Sarah Weinman, Gene Seymour, Geoffrey O'Brien, and David Lehman. Have a wonderful evening, and warmest and best wishes for the holidays from all of us at Library of America.